New Year's Eve, 1958, I remember very clearly because we went to a wedding in the older part of the city. And coming back from the wedding, the city seemed empty. And my parents kept remarking about the emptiness. Look, there's no one on the street. Look how quiet things are. Oh, something must be happening.
On the 31st of December, we were under attack in Banes, Oriente, in a very remote area. All of a sudden, we get the call, hey, the president has left the country. The mayor of the town comes to see us and say, you guys are in trouble. I mean, the president has left and all the generals are gone and all the ministers.
Next morning, wake up, my dad tells me, Batista's gone. He's fled. I said, you're lying. He said, no, I'm not. I swear to you, it's true. He left.
On January 1st, 1959, the Cuban people woke up to the rapidly spreading news that their president, Fulgencio Batista, had left the country in the middle of the night, creating a power vacuum that would last for days.
Well, everybody was clapping and real excited that the government was no longer there and that we'll have some other people that are new and they're going to be very good for the poor and they're going to do a lot of things and things are going to change and we're going to have a different life.
But then the uncertainty to what was going to happen was so intense because there were several groups jockeying for power to fill the vacuum. It wasn't at all certain in anyone's mind that Fidel Castro was going to be able to take over. I remember very, very clearly my parents' instructions. Do not go outdoors today. And this is just a few days after Christmas, so for heaven's sakes, I'm on Christmas break from school and now I'm trapped in the house on a beautiful day. Well, every day was beautiful. But I still remember my mom saying, don't even stick your head out the door.
At first, the celebration was peaceful as shouting, cheering crowds surged through the city. Then the temper of the throng changed and an ugly mob ranged the streets. Its prime targets, the symbols of the overthrown regime. The gambling casinos, the parking meters, the homes and businesses of Batista's cronies.
I remember being in the car with my parents and my sister, and I saw a mob of people going into an establishment that had pinball machines. Seeing people dragging pinball machines out in the middle of the street and destroying them.
Many people in the United States and in Europe, and I think even in Latin America itself, fail to realize is that opposition to Batista was intense and profound.
6 years of surface prosperity and government corruption, of repression and police brutality, bred explosive discontent. Now Batista has fled. A new leader is on the scene, Fidel Castro.
Coming into Havana was something out of this world. Everybody was in the streets, everybody was welcoming them, everybody was happy that Batista was no longer there and that they had taken over.
Just the mere fact of seeing tanks rolling down the street for me made the day magical. And then seeing the indentations that the tank treads had made on the street and me thinking, those will stay there forever. I held out my hand to catch bullets that the rebels were shooting up in the air as the parade came through. This is how stupid kids are about these things. I had no idea. Neither did most of the people standing there waving their little Cuban flags that what was happening was a change for the worse.
The most wonderful place in the Caribbean. Beautiful island, beautiful beaches, sunny, just absolutely beautiful.
It was very safe, for one thing. I remember when I was 10, 11 years old, being able to get on a bus and go downtown Havana.
Havana was full of life, day and night.
Life in Cuba for a child prior to Castro was heaven. You were so free to jump from trees and do here, swim in rivers, swim in oceans. You could go with your friends anywhere you wanted. Nobody would stop you from doing anything. And as a boy, I really appreciated that.
Cuba, as I was growing up, before Fidel, was a prosperous place. You could see that very clearly, just by looking at the city, looking at the buildings in the city and the way that the city had grown in the first half of the 20th century. The growth was phenomenal. But even as a child, I could tell that there were big differences between those who had and those who didn't have. It was quite obvious to me from very early on that there were problems. And I was very conscious of these problems, and I always kept asking my parents, why are there so many pictures of dead people in the newspaper? Why are people so opposed to President Batista? Why is there poverty? Same question any child would ask.
My father was in the military for 33 years in the Cuban Army. He was in the cavalry, the only cavalry regiment in Cuba that the Cuban Army had. And that's how I got associated with the Army from the very early stages of my life, riding horses, and then the cleaning equipment, that sort of thing, with my father when I was 4, 5, 6 years old. He was the reason why I joined the military. I want to be like him. I was very proud of my father all the time. When the opportunity came, I asked him to help me enlist in the military, and he did. I was 16 years old. I said that I was 18. They took that information. They allowed me in, and that's how I made my career there. I spent 4 years in the military prior to Castro.
In order to understand how Fidel Castro came to power, we head back to 1952, when Fulgencio Batista took control of Cuba in a military coup, ousting the democratically elected president. Batista suspended the Constitution and led the country with an iron fist, all the while enriching himself and his cronies. Fidel Castro, an ambitious young lawyer, decided to challenge Batista. On July 26, 1953, he led an attack on the Moncada barracks in Santiago, Cuba. The assault was a complete failure, but Castro had made a name for himself and his cause, which came to be known as the 26th of July movement. After being released from jail nearly 2 years later, Castro left Cuba to raise money and build support for his fledgling revolution. In the fall of 1956, he and 82 others returned to Cuba on a yacht called the Granma and waged another attack. This was a far worse fiasco than Fort Moncada, but Castro was able to escape along with more than a dozen of his fellow revolutionaries, including his brother Raul and his friend from Argentina, Che Guevara. They disappeared into the vast Sierra Maestra mountains in the old province of Oriente.
When Castro invaded, I was one of the first troops to go to challenge those guys, to pursue him in the mountains of Oriente. Our mission was to go in there and chase him, capture him, and then bring him back. We couldn't. They disappeared. Those 16, 15 people disappeared in the hills. So the armies continued to send reinforcements there. And all of a sudden, we captured some documentation that contained Fidel Castro's name and Che Guevara. So for the first time, I heard those names.
First films of Cuban rebel leader Fidel Castro and his ragged force in their mountain stronghold, made shortly before fighting erupted in all 6 of Cuba's provinces. This is the band, numbered at about 1,000, that for 16 months has held out in the rugged Sierra Maestra mountains near the island's eastern tip.
We found ourselves scattered all over the Sierra Maestra, which is a huge place, in groups of platoon size, guarding a hill here and there. The revolution was gaining more power throughout the country. More urban warfare was being detected in every city in the country. Then Castro was making speeches from the hills to foreign correspondents. So there was now a symbol of that revolution in the making. On the civilian world, a great number of people in Cuba wanted to see Batista go at whatever expense. And that's what brought Castro into power. And when Castro in 1957 started getting the support of Time magazine and the New York Times and all these other things that everybody have heard, is when the Cuban people started rallying around his movement as something real that was going to throw Batista out. And that's what happened on the 31st of December. When Batista decided to leave the country, everything collapsed, including the military. Imagine a regular army, fully loaded, weapons ready, ammunition, the chain of command intact, and you had to surrender to your enemy, for no reason whatsoever. You don't have to surrender. You haven't lost a battle. But that was the case on the 1st of January. And when we got to Havana, everybody was, hey, go to the quartel. You're under arrest. That was the beginning. And on the 7th of January, I was already arrested and thrown in prison for no reason whatsoever, no valid reasons other than I was in the military.
Outside Havana's presidential palace, hundreds of thousands rally at the call of revolutionary leader Fidel Castro, who estimated their number at 1 million. Most of the throng wears the colors of Castro's 26th of July movement. They are in an exultant mood as the man who overthrew the Batista dictatorship calls on them to approve the public trials and executions of pro-Batista figures guilty of war crimes and atrocities.
They were executing 20, 30 people every night. There was no lawyers, no nothing. You would just call at 2:30 in the morning, your name was called in that roster, and you went away, and we didn't see you anymore. I spent 10 months in prison listening to firing squads, shooting people every night, and wondering if I was going to be the next guy.
I saw the executions live on television. That shocked many people. I remember adults talking about this and being somewhat disgusted by the bloodbath. But there was this feeling that change was necessary. And kids don't know how to make sense out of these things.
I think the first year, everybody had hopes. The first year was, some people will say, oh, he's communist. Other people will say, well, we have to give him a chance.
We were a family that, even though we were a middle-class family and all that, we supported him. This is a man who came down from the mountain promising a lot of things to a lot of people. And I believe our family was happy to see that this man promised change to poor people. And he was promising a reform on the agriculture in Cuba. He was promising, better schools, a lot of things that anybody would want in any country.
Well, as a kid, of course, I only knew about what was immediately around me, mostly my family and my schoolmates. There was a lot of optimism. At my school, there was a campaign to collect money to buy tractors for farmers. The kids put together enough money to buy a tractor. It's in the yearbook for that year, the photo of the tractor that we, quote unquote, privileged kids, bought for poor farmers. What it meant to me was finally we're doing something to help the poor. We're now admitting here, everybody knows it, there are families in the countryside that can't buy their own tractors. And we're doing it for them. It's all part of the agrarian reform.
Crafted by Che Guevara and signed into law by Fidel Castro on May 17, 1959, agrarian reform became one of the main pillars of the new revolutionary government. It was designed to break up large agricultural landholdings, including those owned by foreign businesses, and redistribute them to the Cuban people, either directly to the small farmers or through state-run co-ops. Nearly 500,000 acres of this land belonged to American companies. They pressed Castro through the U.S. Embassy for proper compensation. He offered to pay them back in bonds at a fraction of the land's actual value. But the peasant farmers, also known as guajiros, felt they finally had a voice, and the machete became the new symbol of the revolution.
1 million machete-wielding peasants jammed the square before Cuba's national capital in response to the call of Fidel Castro for a celebration of the 6th anniversary of his 26th of July revolutionary movement. It is perhaps the greatest mass rally ever staged in the Western Hemisphere, a telling demonstration of Castro's sway over the Cuban masses.
They were putting more people in prison, and it got to the point that they had no more space. So they decided we had to release some people. And among those guys, lucky guys, it was me. On the 14th of December, one of their commandantes came over and they read the names of a bunch of people, and I was among them. And they said, yeah, you got a set of clothes here, put them on, and you're free to go. We started walking and walking and walking, and all of a sudden, boom, we're there. We're in the middle of civilians. So we jumped on the buses and anything we could and headed down to our homes. I got to my home. My mother, of course, was thrilled because my father was in prison and one of my brothers was in prison. So, I made it. My father's cousin, he suggested that I did not stay in my house that day. He said, come over for a couple of days. I was going to go there, and all of a sudden, one of my friends said, no, let's go to Guanabo, which is another beach near Varadero, and let's spend the weekend there. Okay? We're going to take you and have parties and things. So we went to Guanabo. When I came back, my mother said, get out of here, because it was only 48 hours later. The intelligence people came up here, and they want to pick you up again. So I think you ought to go to your father's cousin farm, like he wanted, and I did. And I went in there, and I went into hiding for like 4 days, and then he had a contact with the Mexican embassy in Havana. He was a politician. He was a mayor of his town and everything else. He was a dentist, so he had some influence. And he got me a passport, false passport, and also a visa. That got me through the airport the next day as a student that was going out for a few days and coming back. And that was it. And I landed, all of a sudden I'm in Mexico. I never wanted to go to Mexico. I never wanted to go anyplace. And my new life begins right there. I met 5 guys in the plane that were in the same situation with me. And from there we became the 6 lonesome guys traveling throughout Mexico in trains and buses, whichever way we could, to get to the capital. When we got to the capital, they didn't like it either, and we ended up in the border in Matamoros, which is on the Mexican side from Brownsville. We swam across, got arrested, and thrown in jail again. So the story of my life. Get to McAllen, Texas, and I spent close to 4 months as an immigrant, illegal immigrant, subject to deportation. But of course, they were not deporting people back to Cuba in those days, except they didn't want us there. And I ended up in Omaha, Nebraska, forced to go there by immigration. We ended up in a farm way out of the way. Within a month, there were 27 Cubans. And within 2 months, there were like 60. We discussed among ourselves, okay, let's make the best out of what we can now, work here, and then send money back to our families in Cuba. And that was our main objective. Remember that in those days, I couldn't say one word in English, lost in the middle of Nebraska where people don't speak Spanish. They didn't understand what I was saying, they didn't understand them, but they were extremely good to me and to my group. I mean, extremely good. That's what humans are when they don't know each other well. They're so nice to each other. It was a great experience for me as a young man.
In 1960, the already fragile relationship between the United States and Castro's Cuba deteriorated rapidly. The Cuban government continued expropriating hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. businesses without compensation. And Castro found new trading partners in Soviet Russia and Communist China. Russia extended $100 million in credit to Cuba, promised to buy 5 million tons of Cuban sugar, and increase shipments of crude oil to the island. When a Russian tanker sailed into Havana harbor, American-owned refineries refused to process the oil, so the Cuban government took them over too.
Over angry Cuban protests, the United States retaliates by cutting off its imports of Cuban sugar. Castro seizes more United States property.
The United States would become the common enemy Fidel Castro needed to rally his country. But for many Cubans, the upheaval Castro imposed upon his own people would prove way too much.
People became unhappy because he was doing too many changes.
Every private business was nationalized, including even the smallest store. The men who sold peanuts on the street, the hot dog vendor, they disappeared. We went to a grocery store that was owned by a Chinese man, a Chinese Cuban. Havana had a very large Chinese population. And Fernando Chan used to give us olives and raisins and so on to eat while my mom was shopping at the store. And he could suddenly no longer give us anything because it wasn't his store. It wasn't his stuff to give away anymore. I had no idea what this meant. I could tell it wasn't a good thing.
People that had something, it was taken away from them. You couldn't have anything. There was a control over everything, control over industries, control over money, control over your life.
first real loss that I felt was the day the currency was changed. And that was a terrible day for most people who were middle class. You had to change whatever currency you had to the new bills and new coins. All the banks were seized by the government, and every bank account was seized. And the most that one could have in any account was set for a very fixed level, and it was not very much. So whatever you had that was over that amount, you lost.
An old aunt of my mother had quite a bit of money in the bank, and her husband was what she had inherited. And she had to go to the bank when the currency changed, and she got 200 pesos. Then she had nothing. I remember I went to the bank with her, and she cried, and she was very upset. And she says, my husband worked all his life, and now I have nothing.
Cuba's newspapers are confiscated, except those which print what the government wishes to be read. Radio stations quickly come under government control and can broadcast only government propaganda under tight censorship.
And suddenly, everything was limited. Everything had limits to it. Movies, books, television shows. Everything came under the control of the revolution.
Castro organized a vast civilian militia made up of men, women, and even children. Everyone would be needed, he said, to defend the country against the enemies of the revolution.
It didn't matter how old you were. You had to become part of the militia, or you have to be part of the Comité of Vigilancia, which is that you have to keep an eye on your neighbors and see what they did or what they didn't do. And we didn't want to do that.
In our neighborhood, they had sort of a neighbor's watch. And there were people in the neighborhood who were the ones who communicated to the government who were the people in the neighborhood who were against the government. And it used to be called the committee.
Every block had a committee for the defense of the revolution. They had their ears and eyes open all the time. And if you said the wrong thing, you could get into an awful lot of trouble. They are the ones who control your food ration cards. They're the ones that control your child's progress through school, what opportunities your child may have in school for further education past the age of 16. If you don't play the game, you don't please the comité, you're done for.
Y tú, campesino, y tú.
In the years since he took power, Fidel Castro has become an enemy of the United States. In the eyes of Washington, a threat to United States security in the Caribbean. A plan of action against him is drawn up. March 17, 1960. CIA Chief Allen Dulles is told secretly, organize a Cuban exile force. He is not told how the force is to be used. He is only told, get it ready.
I was working in Nebraska in the fields when a friend of mine calls me and says, the CIA is putting together a group here. We're going to jump in Cuba, and we're going to start guerrilla warfare against Cuba from inside of Cuba. They're going to resupply us and give us weapons and ammunition and what have you, radios. And so if you want to join us, come on down quickly because this is in the move already. They're moving. And I asked about who is there, who is involved there that I know. They mentioned a couple, 3 names that I knew. And so immediately, that night we talked, and all 27 guys decided to come with me to Miami. Unfortunately, the people that were running the office there were too bureaucratic for us, and they were hiding information that we didn't like, such as don't ask questions, don't ask me where you're going, just sign and get ready to go tomorrow, and that's it. And I got so upset that I said I'm not going to join, and none of the 27 guys joined here. A group of us went to New York to explore New York and to work there. Like 30 days later, they announced in the paper that there was a recruiting officer from the same group. And we went to check and see how they were doing it. And the guy there was a lot smarter. He convinced me that, in fact, we were going to a good place and that everything was good and in order. But if we wanted to go, we had to go right away. And the next day we were in Miami on an airplane with the windows sealed. We couldn't see to the outside. Took off and flew for forever. I thought we were going to Alaska or someplace because it took so many hours to get to where we were going. And landed At 6 o'clock in the morning, the sun is up. We don't know where we are until we finally get on the ground. Start looking around, and finally I saw the Guatemalan flag. Realized where I was. And then saw the Guatemalan army escorting us, got on trucks, went up to the hills, got to a camp that had like 200 Cubans. Then we started training like you go into the army here. You go to a basic training phase, you go to the advanced training phase. And we trained there for close to 6 months.
On January 3rd, 1961, President Eisenhower closed the U.S. Embassy in Havana, officially severing diplomatic relations between the two nations. Later that month, John F. Kennedy would become the new president and inherit all the challenges that Cuba posed, as well as the plans that had been hatched to deal with them. Back in Cuba, Fidel Castro was convinced an invasion was imminent and had his country on high alert.
There were a lot of people doing things to get rid of Fidel at that time, because everybody thought he's communist, he's bringing communism to the island, we don't want him.
Everyone knew that many exiles were preparing for an invasion. Very few of us knew the specific plans, but it was an expected thing.
You hear things, but you couldn't talk much. You couldn't tell everything that you heard, and you were so afraid. So we knew something was brewing, something will happen.
All of a sudden, we had the order given, you're ready to go. No date specified, no place where we were going, except you're going to be flown to Nicaragua tomorrow.
The brigade flew to a CIA-secured airbase, codenamed Happy Valley, on the outskirts of Puerto Cabezas, Nicaragua. From there, they were transported by rail to 6 waiting ships. Then on Friday afternoon, April 14th, 1961, over 1,400 Cuban exiles determined to liberate their homeland launched into the Caribbean Sea and sailed towards Cuba. Their journey would take 3 days. The next morning, 8 B-26 bombers painted to look like planes from the Cuban Air Force attacked Castro's airfields.
The Colombia military outpost was a few blocks from my house. So when they dropped the bombs, it was close. I woke up to the house shaking what I thought was thunder. And it took me a few seconds to realize that this was not thunder, but that actually a war had started. Finally, we're being rescued. That was the feeling I had. We're being rescued. But I might be a war casualty.
The airstrikes took out some of Castro's planes, but far fewer than the brigade and the CIA had hoped. And few believed the ruse that the attacks came from within the Cuban military. The plan was to destroy more in a raid the following day, but after the fallout from the first raid, that attack was canceled by President Kennedy. He also canceled the one scheduled to coincide with the land invasion. At a funeral for those killed by the airstrikes, Castro rallied the Cuban people to fight the invaders. He also ordered his security forces to round up any suspected dissidents from within the population. Anyone not explicitly for the revolution was vulnerable.
Tens of thousands of people were rounded up and imprisoned. And one of them was my father's brother, who spent I don't know how long in prison, but was tortured. And when he was released, one might say politely, with British understatement, he was not himself after the experience. He lost his mind.
We started hearing the news of what's happening. There's an invasion, and they're coming to the houses to pick up everybody that is against the government. And all of a sudden, they appear at our house.
My mom got up and went to open the door, and like I can remember at least 8 or 10 soldiers ran inside the house. They all had weapons, machine guns and rifles and pistols in their hands, and we were sitting at the table looking at them like, what in the world is going on?
And they said, we have to search your house. Okay, so we said, okay, search. They didn't find anything in my house except for 2 hunting guns. So they said, what are these hunting guns doing here? Well, my brother used to hunt.
I had a pellet gun and I had a BB gun. And I'm not really sure at this time if somebody had seen me with that in the backyard, because I used to shoot cans and stuff like that with a pellet gun.
So they said, well, we have to take the guns and any ammunition that you have, and you have to come with us. And we said, why? Because you have armament at your house. So one of the militia guys held me in his arms, and he took me out in a car. And they said to my mother, come with us, and my stepfather, come with us, my brother, everybody that was there. So they took all of us.
An estimated 100,000 Cuban citizens were taken from their homes and detained in stadiums, theaters, hospitals, and other makeshift prisons around the island in hopes of quelling a potential revolt from within. Later that night, the brigade ships finally approached the southern coast of Cuba and quietly entered a narrow body of water known as Bahía de Cochinos, the Bay of Pigs.
My battalion commander came in with the envelopes, with the area photos and the maps and the operational order in what everybody was supposed to do. And when we opened those things and realized that we were in the Bay of Pigs, I didn't even know the name because we knew that area as Ciénaga de Zapata, or the Zapata Swamps. Because it was only, when I was little, we studied in school that was only Alligator Alley. Nobody was supposed to live there.
The plan was to come ashore in 3 places and ultimately secure 40 miles of beachhead, from the remote villages of Playa Larga to Playa Girón and beyond. If the brigade could hold this little piece of Cuba long enough, the hope was that a provisional government made up of Cuban exiles could be brought in from Miami, lay a claim, and ignite a larger war against the Castro regime.
I felt so emotional, like everybody else. We were so happy to see land again, Cuban land, and knowing that we were just going to get on land in a few hours, in our land, and sort of defend it. All of a sudden, you feel patriotic, you feel great, you feel that nothing is going to prevent you from being victorious.
Dawn, Monday, April 17th, Bay of Pigs, Cuba.
Most of the brigade was able to come ashore and secure the beaches, but they couldn't get the bulk of their supplies and the rest of their fellow soldiers off the ships by dawn, and by then, Castro had been alerted and sent his remaining air force.
When daylight broke, we have the brigade out there in the ships. They can't land, they're preparing to land, and all of a sudden we have enemy planes on top of us, and they're shooting at the ships.
The brigade's 2 supply ships and its communications ship are sunk.
It was a very demoralizing factor that they sunk your mothership right there in front of your eyes. And it was a big, big explosion and a big thing, and it just collapsed. I mean, the whole thing just went down. So we were out there on the beach wondering what's going on here.
Within a few minutes, the men on the beach have lost their air cover and their supplies.
The next day, the planes were all over us. And for the next 3 days, that was a main problem in the Bay of Pigs. We had few planes from Castro over us, but they were efficient enough and fast enough to prevent us from moving anywhere.
Now, Castro can bring up his tanks without fear of air attack. And he can bring up thousands of his milicianos. By afternoon, Castro is pressing the brigade hard. How are they to survive? Where are they to get help? Some expect it to come from the underground. There is no uprising, there is no sabotage, there is no help from the underground for the brigade. For the next 48 hours, the men on the beach take a terrible pounding. They wait for help. None comes.
Tuesday night, things get so bad that then calls begin to arrive saying, sorry, we can't support you anymore. The word has been given to terminate the mission. We need to pull you out of there. This is an offer that they have made. They're going to come in tonight. They're going to give us support, and they're going to pull everybody out. So we need to concentrate in Girón to board the ships and get out. And almost unanimously, everybody said, no, we came here to fight for our country. We're not going to leave this country. If you're not going to support us, that's fine, but we're going to stay here. So we stayed. And the night was awful. I mean, shooting all over, artillery. But then we were in a different mode. We were getting tired, hungry, had no place to go, and no objectives to take. And all of a sudden now we know that we're almost defeated.
On the beach at the Bay of Pigs, fighting continues. The brigade has no food, almost no ammunition, no hope of help from within Cuba or from outside.
Wednesday afternoon, the word comes up. That's it. We can't hold the lines anymore. Everybody's on his own. I took like 15 people with me, got into the swamps. By 4, I was ready to blow my head off because I was so thirsty. And inside those swamps, it's so hot. Some of us wanted to commit suicide. I pulled my gun out, I put the round in the chamber, and I started looking for a place to hit it. A few seconds later, for some reason, I couldn't do it. I couldn't pull the trigger. As a matter of fact, I left that gun inside of a trunk of a tree with my gold chain that had the Caridad del Cobre, the Virgin, and my ID card from the Cuban Army. It's there. I left it all in there because I didn't want them to pick up anything from me. 5 minutes later, we just continued to walk again, and here as we see a couple of guys' heads, and we're in the middle of a movement of a battalion, their battalion, and when we see each other, we open our eyes and we start shooting at each other. 10 minutes later, I had the 15, there were 6 wounded, 1 killed, 3 or 4 escaped, and 2 guys were captured with another fellow and me.
At 3:45 p.m. Wednesday, April 19th, resistance ends. All those who are not killed are taken prisoner. In less than 72 hours, Castro has destroyed the brigade. The American planned, trained, and backed invasion of Cuba is now a total failure.
Since we were the first group to be captured, they traveled us in the back of a truck with our hands tied through the middle of Havana. 7 days of suffering, hardship, fighting, and you were thinking that you were doing something great for your country. And then they paraded you through the middle of your brothers and sisters that you were supposed to liberate. And these same people were looking at you like you were an animal and you don't deserve anything, and they're throwing tomatoes at you and bottles and shouting at you and calling you names. I felt confused. I was a young man, of course, and I didn't understand some of the things. I look around and I couldn't believe it, that these are the same people that were the Cubans that I thought that I was going to liberate, that were going to make him free, that I was going to offer him some better life. In my mind, this was a tremendous blow.
His victory at the Bay of Pigs emboldened Fidel Castro, but he remained leery of another invasion. He kept the prisoners of Brigade 2506 hostage in Havana for months, while parties in the United States tried to negotiate their release without success. In the meantime, most of the Cuban citizens detained across the island were finally allowed to go home, but life for them would never be the same.
It was not easy to live in the same house and have the same neighbors. A lot of the neighbors were pro-Fidel, and they said, oh, these people were in jail. These people are worms, gusanos.
Our situation at home became very stressful. These neighbors, the same neighbors who I guess pointed us out at the soldiers that night of the invasion, kept walking up and down the sidewalk in front of the house, and we knew they were watching us. I mean, we knew they were watching us. So
we knew we had to get out. We knew we couldn't live there anymore. Because after all this, you would be signaled like, oh, these people are against the revolution. They are doing something. We were doing nothing. But that was the idea.
By the end of 1960, over 40,000 Cubans had left Castro's Cuba for the United States, and their numbers were increasing by nearly 1,500 a week. They were professionals, skilled workers, doctors, lawyers, and judges who suddenly found themselves destitute in the United States. Many had been Castro supporters, but were terrified with the course the regime had taken. Almost all of them thought their exile would be temporary, and they would be returning to Cuba again soon when things changed.
Most everybody felt that that couldn't last. And the government, Castro, that whole scenario would not last. So people would ask you, why do you want to leave? This isn't going to be here in 3 months, you know, this isn't going to be here in 2 months. But I think my mom felt very strongly about getting us out of there regardless. Even if we had to come back in 2 months, she wanted us out of there.
We fear for my brother a lot. My mother feared for my brother. He was only 17 years old, and he was a boy. And my mother feared for his life.
I remember that day, the day that we left, vividly, because all kinds of emotions that you can think of were going on. First of all, just to be able to get on the airplane, just to be able to get past the people who had, you know, searched us, just to be able to get by. There was one last person very close to the airplane, and I remember my mom grabbing my hand and grabbing my sister's hands and just saying, just don't say anything, just don't do anything, don't even look back. Let's just try to get on that airplane. And we did. We got on the airplane and we sat down. I did get a feeling when, as the airplane was taking off and I looked back to the island, I had a strange feeling that I wasn't going to see Cuba again for a long time, and I'd never been back.
I need to thank God every day of my life for having been able to escape and to get out of that island, which all of us loved, and we never wanted to leave.
It was just incredible. It was incredible to leave everything that my parents worked for all their lives. You just left everything. We came here with nothing.
We had a good life. It was a beautiful place. It was the most beautiful island in the Caribbean. I have been in other places. I know that my island was the best.
Things were very fluid. In 1961, after the Bay of Pigs, the changes were coming really fast. Nobody knew what was going to happen because there was no real information. We had not gone to school for several months. Parents refused to send me to a state-run school. They didn't want us being indoctrinated. And there was no end to that in sight, right? So if I was going to have an education, it wasn't going to be there. Number two, we knew of the older teenage kids being sent out to the countryside to do forced labor, basically slave labor, one kind or another, or to be sent, the older ones, to Eastern Europe or the Soviet Union. So that was the great fear, and that was the greatest fear that my parents had, and the greatest fear my mom expressed to us. Cuba being Cuba, the way that Cubans share things with one another very openly. The information got out that there was this way to get kids out.
What came to be known as Operation Pedro Pan involved a vast underground network inside Cuba and the United States. The mission was to provide visa waivers for children to get out of Cuba and support for these children once they made it to the United States. The parents, who for many reasons couldn't leave Cuba themselves, had to make the gut-wrenching decision to send their children to a foreign country alone. Some were as young as 6 years old.
I'd been watching it happen to some of my friends, so it didn't come as a total surprise. I mean, I knew that kids were being sent. I'm almost certain it was my mom who broached the subject to us. I don't remember being asked if I wanted to take part or not. It was just simply offered up. And I do remember feeling very mixed emotions about it. I liked the idea of escaping from there, but I was also very frightened about leaving my family. We got about a 2 to 3 week notice. You know, you're leaving on April 6th. That's when you leave. And that's when we left. We went through what everyone went through, in that when we got to the airport, we went through a door, we were strip searched, and then my brother and I went into this room that was walled in with very thick plate glass called the fishbowl La Pecera, that's what we called it. And we could see our family on the other side of the glass. We couldn't talk to them because the glass was so thick. And that seemed to last for hours and hours and hours. I don't know how long we were there. All I know is that we left home early in the morning for the airport, and our plane didn't take off until sunset. And it was a very long, prolonged goodbye with no words because we couldn't talk across the glass. Time came to leave. No one got emotional. We're all very calm, composed. I remember my parents telling me many times, be brave, don't cry. I was kind of looking forward to this adventure because I had never flown before, much less I'd never left Havana, let alone Cuba. And I was convinced this would only be for 2 or 3 months. That's what everyone thought. This is just 2 or 3 months. My mom was already making plans to join us in the US. But what everyone thought would happen was Castro regime could not last that long. We'd be coming back. That's what I thought. I'm coming back in 3 or 4 months, and I'm going to have a nice adventure. I still remember very clearly turning back as we're walking towards the plane, looking back, seeing my whole family behind the glass, my dad with his hands in his pockets. Walked up the steps to the plane, I turned around, I could see, much smaller now, my mom and dad. That's all I remember seeing, my mom and my dad. My mom was waving her cane as my mom walked with a cane. And that's the last time I saw my dad, with his hands in his pockets. And we took off, landed in Miami shortly afterwards. It's a very short flight. And my brother was placed in one van, I was placed in a different van. We went to different camps. Next morning I woke up and I looked out over the very flat landscape homestead near the Air Force Base. Just totally flat. I had never seen anything so flat in my whole life. I realized I was in a different place. I started to get real anxious, but somehow I just managed to get through that day and the next day and the next day and adjusted. And by the time that a year had passed, April 1963, I was convinced I was never going to see my family again, ever, and adjusted myself to that.
By the time it ended in 1962, Operation Pedro Pan would bring over 14,000 children out of Cuba without their parents. About half were settled with relatives in the United States, but the rest needed foster care and were placed with foster families or in orphanages, group homes, or other facilities across the country. To this day, Operation Pedro Pan remains the largest organized exodus of unaccompanied minors in the Western Hemisphere. But it all came to an end in October of 1962, when the world approached the brink of nuclear war.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
For 13 days, the world held its breath, while parties on both sides negotiated a way out of what came to be known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. Many thought that an all-out nuclear war was imminent. But by Sunday, October 28th, they'd reached an agreement. The Soviets would dismantle and remove the offensive missiles from the island, and the United States would publicly pledge not to invade Cuba. While the rest of the world breathed a sigh of relief, Fidel Castro was furious. He'd been left out of the negotiations and was not happy with the results. He felt the Soviets had betrayed his revolution. He immediately closed Havana's airport to all American planes, effectively shutting the door on legal immigration from Cuba to the United States. 2 months later, just before Christmas 1962, he released the surviving members of Brigade 2506 in exchange for $53 million in food and medicine.
Under the circumstances, I felt like they have taken half of my life away from me. And that night when I arrived in Miami, it was an empty feeling of, I got here, I'm a free man, but what is this? I had no family here. My mother, father, my brothers, everybody was in Cuba. Very, very strange feeling when we got out, on the airplane and left that city behind. It's like you leave you go somewhere, you go with your family, and then all of a sudden you get on an airplane and you take off, and then you look down and you say, why did I leave him behind? You don't know. Very, very, very strange, very bad moment in my life.
By the time Fidel Castro closed the door on legal immigration out of Cuba in 1962, nearly 250,000 Cubans had fled his revolution for the United States. The majority ended up in South Florida and drastically stretched the local resources. The Dade County public school system saw the equivalent of a classroom a day of new students arrive. In 1961, President Kennedy established the Cuban refugee program to help. Like many Americans, he considered these Cubans symbols of the Cold War battle between democracy and communism. The program soon evolved into the largest and most comprehensive system for helping immigrants in U.S. history, offering basic needs, housing, healthcare, and even job training. Millions of dollars were pumped into the local economy. And while many of these Cubans consider themselves exiles rather than permanent immigrants, they still had to make a living. Some found jobs, often beneath what they had been doing in Cuba. Others used their entrepreneurial skills to open up small businesses, butcher shops, bakeries, and cafes that catered to the Cuban culture, essentially recreating Havana in the middle of Miami. But even as these Cubans began to thrive in the United States, they never lost their longing to return to their homeland. Most would never have the chance. Castro's revolution permanently changed Cuba, and the home these early exiles remember was gone forever.
rico que tiene el bebé.
Los jóvenes tienen hoy en sus manos
Listo. Yo finish escuela de circo 1986. Aquel tiempo lindo. 87 estudié en Rusia. Algo. Para falta de respeto, esa es la comercial.
Esa es la comercial porque no
ahora viene
tenemos
alguien.
espectáculo.
Ahora viene alguien.
Oye, dale la pilla de música.
Buenas tardes, tío. Es que no tiene que hacerlo, es él.
Él trabajó en todo, ¿eh? Estuve en barco, en crucero. Este crucero fue el primer crucero que entró en Cuba. Really. Estados Unidos no quiso más que el crucero viniera a Cuba y lo compraron, el crucero lo compraron. No es como antes. Antes era mejor. Qué sueño más grande, más grande.
¡Feliz!
¿Cómo te fue el día de hoy, papá?
Bien, caliente. Yo te lo cambio a meses. Dale, ahí.
No, te abres, ¿no? Mi amor.
Una cremita, me hiciste frente como.
Ay, no. Está bravo. Ay, chico.
¿Te duele?
Me arde.
Ah, chico.
Yo tengo cantidad de curritas, pero están en la casa.
¿Tú has tenido muchas heridas?
Sí. No tengo bebé, no tengo niño. Sí, va muchos cambios, muchos cambios. Profesora, artista, mi casa, mi familia, my family. Trabaja. Ah, el otro año tengo bebé. El otro año tengo bebé. Finish. No, bebé. Es la hora del bebé chiquitico, amamantarlo, entonces tú estás trabajando y no posible, o te vas de gira, o vas a trabajar a otro país y el bebé aquí. Es muy difícil. En mi casa, alumnos, a chicos, y yo teacher de circos.
¿Los niños son como tus hijos?
Sí, claro. Sí. Me gusta mucho enseñar. Mucho. Quisiera que los chicos llegaran a mi edad trabajando. Grande, muchos años.
La primera gira de Cuba que tuve. Estaba trabajando con artistas profesionales de mi país. Artistas reconocidos mundialmente, artistas que han viajado el mundo. Aprendí lo que es ser un artista. En un primer momento no tenía las mismas cualidades, tú empiezas desde cero. Entonces a la vez que vas aprendiendo, tu cuerpo va cambiando y se va transformando físicamente como mentalmente también. Todo el mundo sabe que el circo es lo más peligroso, o por lo menos una de las artes más peligrosas que puede existir. O sea, ponemos en riesgo nuestra vida en todo momento. Sí he tenido golpes, sí he tenido lesiones, sí he tenido fracturas. Cuando me lesiono, me fracturo, pues mi cuerpo se daña y eso hace que mi proceso de artista disminuya, ¿no? Causan dolores incluso mentales que son fundamentales para un artista, ¿no? Fundamental. Bueno, la lección más importante, no rendirse. No rendirse, no apagarse, no decepcionarse, no decir no puedo. Todo aquel que deja sus sueños por una decepción o por un mal día o por un mal rato, nunca va a llegar a ser quien quiere ser. Sí, tengo sueños. Mi sueño es ser artista, ser gran artista. Es mi mayor sueño. Trabajar en un buen circo del mundo, un circo muy reconocido, ser reconocida por mi trabajo. Ese es el mayor sueño y la mayor felicidad que puedo tener. Aún no tengo un futuro idealizado. Ojalá mis condiciones duren mucho tiempo. Duren bastante, tanto que no llegue el momento de imaginarme haciendo otra cosa que no sea mi profesión. O sea, entonces pienso que lo que más podría hacer es enseñar, lo que más me gustaría hacer es enseñar, transmitir, ayudar a otras personas a que luchen también por sus sueños. Es muy importante la educación de los jóvenes. Es muy importante porque es el futuro y eso se nos hace tradición. Es el futuro del circo en Cuba, ¿no?
Nombres otra vez.
Helen, Karen, Karen, Jade.
¿Cuándo fue la primera vez que ustedes vieron un circo?
A los 5 años. Yo quería ser malabarista. Malabarista.
Hoy. Si no tengo el micrófono, muchachos, conmigo sin voz. Cuando giramos la punta de la cortina, José, esa es tu responsabilidad. ¿Ya? No, 2 por aquí y 2 por aquí.
José, mira, ahí estamos hoy, aquí para arriba, como no lo voy a mirar.
Por el... Los jóvenes tienen hoy
Y después te dije, espérame, y después ustedes no me esperan.
en sus manos la cantera, la vanguardia artística del circo, y no solamente del circo, también de la danza, de la música, de las artes plásticas. Y todas las armas, todo lo que la revolución ha puesto en función de que nuestra cultura cada día sea mucho mejor.
Esta es la primera vez. La primera vez que actuamos. Nosotros no tuviéramos miedo. Nosotros nos cayéramos y no hiciéramos los elementos, pero nosotros no tenemos miedo. Porque nosotros platicamos y ahí donde platicamos nos caemos. Nosotros nos sentimos emocionadas porque a veces los aplausos y todos los aplausos a nosotros nos gritan. Yo igual me siento emocionada porque nos aplauden.
¿Qué es tus sueños de la vida, cada uno?
Hacerme una buena ciclista.
¿Ciclista?
Artista de circo. Sí. Ser artista. Yo también. Yo quiero ser maestra.
¿Maestra?
Igual.
¿Aquí en Cuba?
Sí.
El espectáculo de al apagón y vienen las 4 líneas de trapecio. Las 4 gigantes.
Quisiera que los chicos llegaran a mi edad a trabajar.
Sí, tengo sueño. Mi sueño es ser artista.
Grande, muchos años.
Los jóvenes tienen hoy en sus manos
El circo que tienen bebé, tienen su bebé.
Daniela, pasa por tu finita.
Everyone keep an eye out for a spot.
Chisme, tu estación para noticias y música con sabor. Hoy es un día bellísimo aquí en Los Ángeles y tenemos la canción perfecta para disfrutarlo. Así que sube el volumen.
I can go in by myself.
When we left the island, we only could take one suitcase, and in that suitcase was my favorite pink dress.
And when they searched the suitcase, they took your dress, and the adults were strip searched, and it was all very sad. Yes, I know, Lily.
Today, I am wearing a pink blouse to join you in the interview to share all of the great things I know about my beautiful Samita. So no, you cannot go in by yourself.
I highly doubt the other kids will have all of Havana with them in their scholarship interview.
Pero Sammy, that's because they're not Cuban.
Luckily, you are.
Por favor, Señor Dios, mándele un marido a esta niña.
What is she praying for this time?
That I find a husband.
Just don't find him in a bar. Mamima says if you meet someone in a bar, they're a prostitute.
And if you shower when it's raining outside, you'll get struck by lightning. And if you go out with wet hair, you'll get sick, etc., etc. Don't worry. I got the Good Cuban Girls Handbook.
Mira, vamos a practicar. So, Samantha, why would you like to attend this prestigious university?
Because I want to stay close to home so that my mother can monitor my every move, despite the fact that I'm old enough to make my own decisions.
Te voy a leer la cartilla.
I would like to attend this prestigious university because not only does it have an incredible writing program, but it would also allow me the opportunity to stay close to my family, who has always supported me. My grandmother's story of leaving Havana in the 1960s inspired me to become a writer and live out the American dream they always wished I could have.
It's like you don't even want to go to school here.
She doesn't.
You're 11. What do you know?
I know a lot.
Get me out of this freaking car.
See, Sammy?
No.
When can we eat?
Once we part,
Dios, por favor, no dejes que Samantha vaya a la universidad.
Oh, great. My own family praying against me.
Mamima, quiero un french fry.
You're not allowed to eat
que
in your
se quede con
grandfather's car.
nosotros en casa.
Can I just have one fry?
No empiece con el tiquitiqui.
Hey, niña,
I want my chicken nuggets now.
No, por Dios.
Fíjate bien, niña.
Well, this spot's not going to work. Next question. What's your greatest accomplishment?
My greatest accomplishment is, well, I applied for something and I got in, and it means I can go away for a little while.
Be more specific.
I'm trying to.
I don't know why you asked for my help if you don't even want it.
I never asked for
I'm
it.
your mother. It's assumed you want my help. Ay, Mari, no la mortifiques.
Lucy, what is your greatest accomplishment? My greatest accomplishment is when I got into Boston College just like Sammy.
What did you say?
That she's just like you. See? I tried to show you earlier.
Where did you find that?
¿Qué dijiste?
Nada, Mamima. Give it back. What's it to you? My life?
I'm still waiting for an answer.
I'm gonna break your doll's arms.
Mom! I suggest you take this seriously.
When are you gonna stop playing with dolls?
When Lily stops buying them for me.
Mira, mami, un príncipe americano.
Dios, me está
Nothing
escuchando.
like that Southern Italian you married.
Do you think he's leaving?
No me preguntes a mí.
Are you heading out?
Oh, you want my spot?
That'd be great.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Hola, niñito.
If you
I am
don't
Sammy's grandma. Are you
I'll tell
single?
Mom that you kissed that Carlos boy on the playground.
You
Ay,
think that's
American
worth
City.
more than this?
Ay, American City.
Mami,
gonna pull out,
es
okay?
citizen, no
Thank
city.
you.
Esto es lo que yo dije.
I'll do your doll's hair every day for a month.
2 months.
Seriously?
Tenía que ser americano. He knows I'm here waiting for him.
Podemos encontrar otro
Santas
lugar.
almas, santos, santos. Ayúdanos a encontrar un espacio vacío.
You know, Lucy's pretty hungry.
Oh, is she
I don't have
now?
time for this.
¿Eres tan impaciente?
Lo saqué de ti.
What if I can sneak the food to the back?
She's thirsty too.
Got a few dollars in that purse? Holy crap, how'd you get that much money?
Perks of being the youngest. Lily likes me best.
You can sneeze and she'd give you $5.
¿Viste?
Achoo.
Qué guapo estaba ese muchacho. Debíamos haberle dado el número de teléfono de Sammy. Blonde hair, blue
You've
eyes.
been married for 21 years. Let it go.
You just had to insist on being free and independent and making your own decisions.
He's Italian, no comunista.
Te dije que no te casaras con él.
Everyone ready?
Faculty and staff only.
We have an interview today.
God bless you. God bless you.
Mami,
God bless you.
mami, ¿qué estás haciendo,
bless you.
mami? Mami, ¿qué estás haciendo?
Bendiciéndolo.
haciendo?
Bendiciéndolo.
No.
Letter, please.
Alabado sea Dios.
Oh no.
Next question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Mom.
I'm doing this because I love you. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Come on.
In
you
Boston. I see myself in Boston. I'm going to school in Boston. Not here, not close to home, not anywhere in California. Boston.
You'll never make it out there without us.
¡Samantha Marie! Esas candelas.
Mira que se complica la vida.
Yo no me meto.
¡Samantha Marie!
Hey, wait for me. What's it like in Boston?
¿A dónde van?
A Boston.
Ay, a Boston. Que Dios te bendiga. Girls!
Mi nombre es Lopez. Soy la directora de la agrupación artística Algo Nuevo.
Nonprofit band Algo Nuevo keeps the music alive for Miami seniors facing isolation during the pandemic.
Una hora de música tradicional de este conjunto Algo Nuevo que llegó aquí a este condominio en la ciudad de Hialeah para compartir con las personas de la tercera edad.
Yo me paso la vida oyendo música por radio, porque cuando uno está con muchos pensamientos, uno oye música, si puede tirar un pastillito.
Fundada en el año 1994 con mi compadre que fue Alberto Menéndez, que desgraciadamente hace una semana falleció ya con una edad muy avanzada. Me hubiera gustado mucho haber estado desde jovencita en un escenario montada, pero mi padre no entendía que eso fuera correcto para su única hija en aquella época de hace 60 y pico de años. No era una buena opción para una muchacha. Bueno, las mujeres en aquel entonces no eran muy bien vistas como artistas, a no ser que fueran a un nivel muy elevado o una gran cantante. Pero lo que me gustaba hacer a mí, que era bailarina, en mi sangre hay mucha mezcla. Yo tengo de francés, tengo de español, tengo de cantonés, tengo de negro, y todo eso ha dado resultado a esto que soy yo ahora. Quizás lo más importante de todo esto, haya personas que dirán, ay, pero ya ella era mayor para hacer las cosas que empezó a hacer y que sigue haciendo. Pero es que yo me realicé, yo me siento feliz con lo que estoy haciendo, con el pago que estoy recibiendo del público para el cual estoy trabajando. He seguido siendo muy feliz con eso. El premio más grande que era que mi familia me apoyaba en esto. Yo creo que mi papá al cabo de los años se dio cuenta que eso era lo que en verdad me iba a dar parte de la felicidad para realizarme como persona. Eso era lo que me faltaba y me apoyó totalmente. Mi padre me brindó un apoyo económico cuando hacía falta dinero, lo que hiciera falta, ahí estaba mi padre. Estaba mi mamá y estaba mi esposo también. Mi esposo era el bartender cuando servía la comida, porque siempre en estos eventos le dábamos comida a la comunidad que venía, a los viejitos. Mi esposo era el colaborador, cargar los equipos, cuando se estaba preparando la comida aquí en la casa, porque aquí se cocinaba, no había recursos para un restaurante ni nada de eso, aquí se cocinaba. Incluso yo involucro también a mi hija fue bailarina muchos años dentro de mi evento, siendo una niña de 9 años comenzó, y mi hijo fue sonidista nuestro también. O sea que toda la familia estábamos en eso. Bueno, como yo tuve el soporte de mi familia y he tenido el soporte también del público envejeciente que viene a nuestros espectáculos, quiero darle también este soporte a los que vienen y tocan la puerta de Algo Nuevo y quieren involucrarse dentro del arte y tienen al artista dormido que nunca pudieron desarrollar. Aquí lo han logrado hacer.
I want to say thank you, Marisol, for letting me play my original music from Cuba, because this is my music, this is my country, this is my feeling. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Esto es lo que nos gusta hacer y venimos a hacerlo con todo el amor del mundo, porque sabemos que lo van a disfrutar ellos y nosotros lo estamos disfrutando.
Para mí es número uno, no importa el dinero, no importa nada, no importa el calor, no importa la lluvia. O sea, lo primero es el servicio a estas personas que necesitan personas como nosotros para traerle la música.
Cada vez que interpretamos una canción, las cantan, se la saben completa, cualquier canción, sea un bolero, sea un son, sea una guaracha, sea un guaguancó, Inmediatamente que nosotros comenzamos la canción, ellos comienzan a cantar las canciones. Entonces eso nos toca a nosotros también, porque sabemos que estamos tocando el corazón y el sentimiento de ellos.
Me siento realizado con la función que hago y muy feliz de ver sonreír a tantas personas mayores.
Estamos muy agradecidos porque nos ha dado la virtud de poder estar todavía disfrutando, igual que ellos nos disfrutan a nosotros.
El trabajo de Algo Nuevo para los envejecientes es muy importante. Muy importante. Eso se ha visto en esta etapa de cuarentena, de lo que hay con el coronavirus, de la manera que nosotros hemos ido a darle música cuando ellos están metidos en su casa, que no pueden salir de ahí, que tienen que estar hacinados ahí, digamos. Algo Nuevo ha ido a darle música y esa gente han disfrutado tanto lo que hemos hecho.
This is one of the most beautiful things I've gotten to experience. The faces of everybody here, how they dance, how they come out of their apartment. I think that this is great what you guys are doing.
Me hizo sentir como si fuera un niño de 15. Estoy muy feliz aquí con la musiquita que nos trajeron. Me recordó Cuba. Ha despertado aquí la satisfacción de todos presentes aquí. Magnífico.
Así que estamos aquí para que ustedes pasen un rato bien agradable. Si alguno desea bailar, acuérdense del distanciamiento social. Y ustedes que están allá arriba, muchísimas gracias por asomarse al balcón. Y espero que disfruten de este momento para todos ustedes.
Un aliciente, porque la tercera edad se pasa la vida metido en sus casitas donde viven de retiro. Si no hubieran estos eventos, era tristeza todo lo que había.
Seeing the elderly dance and go back to their young years there are no words. The joy I get out of it, and she doesn't make a penny. She doesn't earn 1 cent for this, and that really was a wow for me.
Este trabajo ayuda a todas las personas de la comunidad que están aquí a revivir y a mantener todos aquellos momentos felices y buenos que existieron en nuestra cultura cubana, que fueron momentos de fusión, ¿te das cuenta? Y ellos son partícipes de esa fusión.
Es muy bonito, pero es un sacrificio grande que hace tu mamá.
Debería haber más, sí, porque la verdad es que se disfruta. Y por lo menos la gente se siente un poco más alegre, más contento. Y bueno, va pasando el rato, ¿no? Y vamos tirando ahí hasta que Dios quiera.
¿Qué les puedo decir? Ha sido un momento tremendo de satisfacción que le entregamos con todo el corazón, deseándoles muchas bendiciones y felicidad.
Lo que daría por un café cubano ahora mismo.
So delicious. You would think you're in Havana, Papi. How's Mommy?
Happy, but busy. Heaven is a busy place.
Busy. Busy doing what?
That I cannot tell you. You have to find out on your own.
What kind of bullshit prize-winning answer is that?
Well, under the circumstances, the appropriate one. How long have you had them?
15 years. After the funeral, no one wanted to clean out your office. The family was too emotional. So, I volunteered.
Why do you keep them for so long?
Sentimental reasons.
Oh, how so?
These awards are the only memories I have of you.
Surely, you must have other memories.
You were already a successful journalist when I was born. Always busy covering some major news event somewhere. You were never really around much.
Era un mundo diferente, especialmente para un inmigrante que tenía 5 bocas que alimentar y también hablaba poco inglés. Tenías que atacar el trabajo, si es que lo querías.
You're not upset I'm getting rid of them? They're your legacy.
Lalo, fui uno de los periodistas más respetados de Cuba. La gente citaba de mis artículos. Mi trabajo trajo conciencia y comprensión a la comunidad. Luego Castro cerró los periódicos. Perdí el único trabajo que sabía hacer bien. Nuestra familia no tenía dinero y fuimos emigrados a esta gran nación sin un centavo. Encontré trabajo en un periódico local y seguí haciendo lo que siempre hice bien. Y todo lo hice por nuestra familia. Mi familia es mi verdadero legado.
And the awards?
They are currently buried in your garage, serving no purpose in this world. However, mi familia has continued to grow and prosper.
Hello?
Good morning. Is this Luis Rodriguez?
Yes?
Hello, Mr. Rodriguez. My name is Jessica Waters, and I'm calling on behalf of the Great Falls Historical Society of Patterson. This is in regards to an exhibition we're preparing to honor Patterson's most famous journalists. The principal subject of our exhibition is your father, Jose Rodriguez. Do you have a minute? Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes, I have a minute.
The Society wishes to dedicate a gallery with all of your father's awards and achievements. I understand you still possess most of your father's awards.
Let me check. Can I call you back at this number?
Certainly, Mr. Rodriguez. I cannot tell you how excited we are to honor your late father's great legacy.
I'm honored too. Thanks again. I'll give you a call back soon. It's not fair. Had those awards for 15 years, not a week after I get rid of them. Some museums to showcase them. You drinking café cubano?
I made a deal with an angel.
What kind of deal?
I cannot share those details.
What kind of false surprise winning answer is that?
The kind that does not require an award. Salud, hijito.
Salud, papi.
Manicero, mani, si te quieres poner pico divertir, cómprame un cucuruchito de maní. Y ahí llegó el manicero, y ahí llegó, y está aquí el manicero, y ahí llegó. Por la calle de La Habana vendo maní, manicero, manicero, maní. Si te quieres por el pico divertir, cómprame un cucuruchito de maní. Por eso tú saliste.
Estas flores mayormente que yo tengo son prácticamente flores para los religiosos, para la gente que cree en los santos, que cree en los dioses, que cree en los orichas, para los africanos, para la olla, para eso. Las espadas de Changó son para Changó. Las vacas y las azucenas, esos son para los muertos, y también para los lobos.
¡Ay, flores, pero! ¡Ay, flores, flores! ¡Florero!
Voy a morar el ajo. Vamos el ajo grande, casi voy a morar.
¡Calma! ¡Reza!
Ahí el cloro.
De ahora, desincrustarse para baño.
Es para lo que es la taza del baño, para los azulejos, la limpieza completa de lo que es la taza del baño, para las manchas, el racito de jabón que le quedan a los azulejos, todo se lo quita.
La lejía el cloro.
Paquete de perchero, palito de tendedera, hay escoba, haraganes, trapeadores, recogedor.
Ah, rica y sabrosa es de mantequilla, la buena galleta. Hay galleta de mantequilla, hay galleta, hay galleta. Hermoso. Sí.
Recuerda, ¿de qué te viene?
No, lo que me estoy poniendo la puta en el medio de la calle. ¿De qué país son? ¿Sabes por qué te pregunto?
recogedor, brillador. Llevo aro de aluminio, perchero, palito de tejera. Abajo hay jarro de aluminio, hay palito de tejera.
Bueno, sálvame. Dame un 100. Dame un 100. Y está aquí el manicero. Y ya llegó. Hola que la Habana vendo maní. Manicero. Manicero, maní. Si te grabo el pico divertir, cóbrame un cucuruchito de maní. Y me llamo Lisette porque tengo nombre.
Tú sabes lo que es eso. A mi edad, tener que dejarlo todo.
Yo lo sé, mami. Ten fe, por favor. Todo va a salir bien.
Es que no quiero que te agarren como a esos prisioneros políticos y acaben contigo.
Eso no me va a pasar. Nosotros vamos a tocar tierra. Nosotros vamos a ser libres. ¿Qué quieres?
90 millas.
¿Qué es esto? ¿Qué te pasó?
Estoy bien.
¿Qué te pasó?
Tenemos que ir esta noche. Nos tenemos que ir esta noche.
¿Pero qué te pasó? ¿Qué le pasó? Jorgito. Esta noche. ¿Pero cómo nos vamos a ir esta noche? ¿Tú crees que tenemos suficiente gasolina? ¿Por qué no nos esperamos? Mira la condición de que está tu esposa.
Tenemos que irnos con lo que tenemos. Pero nos tenemos que ir hoy.
Si nos vamos así, es un suicidio. Yo no sé. En verdad,
Mami,
yo no sé.
Mami, por favor. Por favor.
¿Saben de Ulises?
¿Qué dijiste? ¿Qué le dijiste?
¿Y qué dijeron? Dime algo. ¿Qué le dijiste tú?
Lo más poco posible. ¿Dónde está la familia?
¿Están en la finca? Alain, ve a buscar el resto de la familia. Alain, apúrate, por favor.
Tami, por favor, ¿tú no crees que es mejor que nos esperemos un mes más?
No.
Mira cómo te han dejado todas.
No, nos tenemos que ir ahora. No tenemos ni un minuto.
Este jueguito que tú estás jugando. Este jueguito que tú estás jugando a mí me encanta, ¿sabes? Me pone la sangre calientita. ¿Dónde está Ulises?
Yo no sé.
¿Dónde coño está Ulises? Mira lo que tú me acabas de hacer hacerte. A mí no me gusta pegarle a las mujeres. Y me gusta hacerle el amor a las mujeres. ¿Sabes qué? Ustedes me están rompiendo el corazón. Tú y todos los demás traicioneros que se van de esta isla, se marchitan, después vuelven vestidos de gringos. Todos deberían morirse. Todos son unos traidores. La revolución es vida o muerte.
Traidor eres tú.
¿Y tú qué?
Luchando por una Cuba libre.
Contrarrevolucionarios, ¿ah? ¿Te cae el pulso? No tiene pulso. Verifícala bien.
hay un mapa. Llama los refuerzos. ¡Vámonos!
Si nos vamos por aquí, nada más son 90 millas.
Familia, aquí está el pescado, mira. Quita todo.
¿Va a ser suficiente para 8 personas?
Pues eso es lo que pude conseguir.
Pues no lo es.
Mami, tranquila. Hiciste bien, Tomás. Gracias.
Ok.
Prepara la comida que nos tenemos que ir.
¿Hoy?
Nos vamos hoy.
A mí no me importa que nos quedemos sin comida. Pero el agua me preocupa.
Yo calculé. Si tomamos 4 onzas por persona, es suficiente para 8 personas al día.
4 onzas. Sí. No nos dan.
¿Cuántos días en el mar?
No sé, ojito, 3, 4.
Ok, dale, prepárenlo todo. Vámonos.
Vamos por ahí.
¿Tú confías en mí? Esto es lo que tenemos que hacer. Los tenemos que ir hoy.
Sí. Yo confío en ti. ¿Y tu mamá?
Se va a enterar cuando lleguemos.
De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané, llego a Puerto voy para Mayarín. De Alto Cedro voy para Marcané, llego a Puerto voy para Mayarín.
Hay un grupo de cubanos que van a tratar de escapar. Van a salir por Baracoa. Patrulla en la costa. Ok. Vela bien. Lo primero que veas, apunta y dispara, ¿ok? Coñoño, quédate en el carro. Silencio.
pero mira, tenemos que estar calladitas, niña, ¿ok?
Como los piratas.
Los piratas.
Hija, ¿qué te pasó?
No importa, papi. Vámonos de aquí. Ay, ¿cómo hiciste?
Hice todo lo que me dijiste. Vamos, vamos.
No tenga un corazón que se adapte al esfuerzo y al heroísmo de una revolución. No los queremos, no los necesitamos.
De Algo voy para